Academica Media. You are listening to Charter School Superstars, bringing you the voices of an education revolution.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Ryan Kairalla, and joining us this week on the program with some beautiful birds behind her. I can hear them. That's fantastic. And it looks like a nice outdoor setting for her. She is the Director of Clinical Innovation at Presence Learning. Our guest specializes in providing mental health support, curriculum, and training to staff and clinicians serving students with mental health needs. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting www.presencelearning.com. We are happy to welcome Stephanie Taylor onto Charter School Superstars. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thrilled to have you. Providing mental health services for charter school students is at the top of mind of every teacher and administrator that I talk to, particularly in light of events like in Parkland and COVID-19. These things are just all the more important. And what I'd love to talk to you about during this interview is the role that you play and that the role that administrators can play in sort of being a bridge between professionals like you and getting students the mental health services they need. So let me start with kind of a global question here for you. Why is providing mental health support curriculum and training to staff and clinicians who are serving students with mental health needs so important?
That's the million dollar question, and I'm gonna try to at least give you a $10 answer. The answer is that it's important in every aspect. So as you mentioned, I think all of us, or I think a lot of people knew and understood that mental health is always just under the surface. And no matter how much we say, we're trying to break stereotypes or trying to destigmatize mental health supports, there still are sort of a lot of rewards in the world to looking like you have it all together. And I think for that reason, a lot of us really allowed, and that's adults and children alike, we really allow ourselves to act like everything is going fine. And I think that the last few years have really shown and really put a highlight on the fact that a lot of that was an act, for one, that a lot of us aren't okay and probably really needed help before anything, before the really significant changes in the world in the last little bit. And then also that maybe it's okay to not be okay, and that we really need to highlight and support this idea that it's important to not need to present yourself as having it all together. And I think particularly on a school level, children always take their cues from adults. That's how they learn and decide, should I be upset by this? Should I react to this? Is this okay? And seeing kind of the adults in the world around them, struggle a bit in the last few years, as well as sometimes being exposed to fewer and fewer adults, as we've quarantined and schools have been shut down. I think it's really made it so that a lot of our children and a lot of the adults in the world actually don't know how to get back to kind of like a baseline where they feel comfortable with their mental health and with moving forward in life and sort of having their being the authentic way they want to be. Like, they're not sure what that is right now. And this is like why it's the perfect time to try to help and support that in both children and adults.
I'd love to come back to what you talked about earlier in your answer about sort of reducing the stigma on campus about talking about mental health, creating an environment where we can talk more readily about these issues and get people more comfortable conversing about them, making it okay to express to others that you are not okay, as you put it. And I imagine in service of that mission, the words and actions of administrators and teachers, staff members is critical. So do you have any actionable advice for those professionals to communicate a culture where people feel like it's okay to talk about mental health, that it's not seen as a deficit, but rather as a positive to get those issues out there?
I do. And I want to I actually want to call out or add on to one thing that you said, which is not only is it okay not to be okay, but it's actually the more that people talk about what they're thinking and feeling and is going on inside their brains, they realize that they're actually very average, that they don't have more anxiety than everybody else, or they don't necessarily have more worries, because we're all thinking the same thing. So, I worked with primarily with high schoolers most of my career. My husband still teaches high school. And every year, just as an example, when they start to graduate, or, they're getting ready to graduate, and, you've got students that are like, I think that I have an anxiety disorder. I think that I have something wrong with me because this is how I'm feeling and this is what I'm thinking. And this is like, I can't deal with these stressors. And to be able to step back and have a conversation about, what does it mean to be in a transitional phase in life? What does it mean that you are now at a point of unknown, right? And that's a large scale example, but that same type of thing happens with kids every single day, where they feel like their emotions must be so very different than everybody else in their same situation. And to find out that it's not is actually really, really therapeutic, because they also realize that, it is okay to not be okay, but also sometimes what they're going through is just very, very average, and is that there are very proven ways to be able to compensate and to cope with those feelings that they're having. So I want to go on that one just for a second. But even in that example, I think the important takeaway, at least for me, is that it's all about opportunities for interaction. And I know that, very much do we want to be able to have programs, and we significantly need programs for students where when they have identified mental health needs or behavioral needs, that there is a way that they can get support and help without having to be part of special education, without having to be identified as having a disability. That's hugely important. But there's also the idea that teachers really need to be facilitated to teach, and specialists need to be able to be facilitated to do their specialty. And I think sometimes we ask teachers and parents to be, everything all wrapped into one, and be able to be mental health professionals, to be good at everything, to be everything that child needs. And I think take a step back and helping teachers realize from a training perspective, as you mentioned, and administrators, that the best thing that they can do actually is be ready to facilitate some of these honest and authentic conversations in their classrooms, and to open up just about how people are thinking, what they're feeling, not in like a confessional sort of way, but again, just that same of like, oh, you know what, when third grade was really hard for me too. This is how I felt when I was in third grade. And being able to facilitate that conversation, that's the way that teachers, within the content that they're already focused on and inside the specialty areas that they already have and that they're already good at, can help students, and by us I mean mental health professionals, can help us kind of sort out those kids who just don't realize that what they're going through is very standard, versus those children who might actually have other significant needs.
Oh, I like that sentiment there at the end. These teachers playing a role of helping you as mental health professionals help the students, because as you noted, teachers aren't mental health professionals. They don't have the training for it. It can often be overwhelming when these difficult circumstances foist these professionals in a role where they feel like they have to be mental health professionals and they're sort of out of their element. That being said, they do have an important role to play in this process. They are the ones that are often first identifying that there may be something wrong and there may be need for additional intervention. So even though they are not mental health professionals, but they are still playing this important role. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the advice that you would give these staff members so that they can be in a best position to support folks like you and what you can do for these students?
Yes. Research really shows that although it's certainly not like harmful or not beneficial in any way to have sort of like time set out in a day to just talk about like social and emotional skills, like that's good. But research really does show that the most impactful thing that a teacher can do, and that I would want to help support them in doing, is just to facilitate conversations about, again, I would say social wellness, essentially. We think of our physical wellness, right? But they need to facilitate conversations about social wellness in their classrooms, taking those learning opportunities. And so a lot of what I can help, or teachers can receive help on, is to sort of like So I'm in the middle of this lesson about math, and this is what happens and this is what's said. Like, how am I supposed to redirect that, or how am I supposed to take that opportunity to have this interaction without it derailing my math lesson entirely, but have it provide some type of, like, you know, motion towards that greater good that I was talking about, which is like being the eyes and the ears of the kids that really need some additional assistance. So I feel like that's the thing that teachers really could receive some support and some professional development doing, because that's what I think is so hard. As being a teacher, is you want to take these opportunities, but you also know that you are accountable and want to focus on the academic things you're working on too. And how do you do both? How do you be in all places at once?
So can you talk a little bit about the resources that are available in this area? Because I can imagine a lot of teachers having that same thought that you are, that I know that there must be a way that I can take my math lesson and find a way to use it as an opportunity to start having these initial conversations with my students. But right, I think it's a lack of resources. It's a lack of professional development. So can you talk a little bit about what resources might be available to help, maybe some of the ones that Presence Learning offers?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing to know that that Presence offers is, um, number one, I think it's nice for teachers and administrators and everyone in school to understand and to know that, for those students who are identified as having perhaps more needs than what can be addressed by the teacher in the classroom in these conversations, I think that for those, it's important to know that we have professionals available, that that Presence provides. We provide staffing to be able to give you school psychologists or social workers or licensed professional counselors for the students to be able to be seen remotely. And one of the great things I think about teletherapy, at least, is that it's very we find that students react very well to this, more so than even if you do have professionals who can provide this from the school, because they like the anonymity of it. Students like to
Wow.
talk to somebody outside of their community. They like to talk to somebody that doesn't know their parents, hasn't been involved in everything that's ever happened with their older siblings. They like to know that they're not going to run into them later. It provides a level of comfort, and we get a level of engagement that is that you really can't necessarily get for all students with one school counselor or one school psychologist. I think to add on to that, it's also really helpful to sometimes be able to culturally match students. So if you've got students who, you know, um, here, I'll give my example. I live in rural Idaho. You talked about the birds and the and the background, and if sometimes when you have to bring somebody in, or you have to get somebody to drive to your community that may live in another community, or they may not have the same background as like the kids that they're actually going to be talking to, sometimes it's very hard for a student to feel like that person understands them or knows what they're going through. And if they had the opportunity to connect to somebody who is maybe, or maybe the only option they have is a female and they'd really much rather talk to a male, or maybe they have a, you know like I said, maybe it's culturally they want to talk to somebody a little more similar to their background. That they are provided that opportunity through this route, where again, even if you have somebody on site, that part we're finding is really key now to getting students to buy in to getting support and help. Um, and then back to the teachers, I think that really that comes in the form of consultation. It's the school-wide consultation, or what we'd call positive behavior supports. That's a school-wide methodology. It's very well, I mean, that's a national methodology, not just presences, but it's really looking at what things are available and supports are put in place that are school-wide. And that's where the gen ed teachers get their supports, and get their instruction and get their guidance, to where it's like, I can watch a 20-minute interaction that you have with a student and then give some feedback, or you can call me out, get in touch with me when you have your prep hour and say, okay, this is what happened, and this is, I'm not sure, or I think I might have missed an opportunity, and have some of that real-time feedback, which is really, coaching is the most successful professional development you can provide.
I'm really pleased by the potential of technology to really provide some significant value for students and staff members alike in this area. I love the things that you brought up about teletherapy. One, that it makes students feel more comfortable throughout the experience, but also that it creates a wider pool of potential professionals that a student can see to better ensure the possibility of a cultural match between the student receiving the services and the professional. Really, really exciting stuff there. Again, you can find out more about our guest's work by visiting www.presencelearning.com. Stephanie, this has been a treat, super illuminating, and I know at the start of the school year, this is a topic that a lot of professionals are thinking a lot about, so the timing in getting to chat with you here is just perfect. But before we let you go, we got one last question for you. If with the snap of your fingers, you could make any change to the education system, what change would it be?
Oh, I knew this was coming, and I still don't know. All right. One change, snap my fingers. I would want to make it so that, this is gonna, okay, sorry. This is just such a very, like, I've worked in schools for a long time. As I mentioned, my husband, my family, like, we're all very, involved in like the minutia of how schools run. And so maybe for those of you who are also in that space, this is going to resonate with you. For everyone else, you're going to be like, that was a weird answer. I would make it so that funding was flexible and did not have to be earmarked for certain buckets. I think that one of the things that is so hard for schools to do is you're like, I have a bunch of money over here in the facilities fund, but I can't use it for more staff. I need more money for this thing, but the grant that we just wrote can only be used for this thing. And yes, I know schools are underfunded. They are. They're underfunded. Teachers are underpaid. But one of the things I think would help do more with what we at least have is the ability for each school to determine what is actually the thing that they need to spend the money on, and be flexible to their individual needs. Like, a school is a community, and that community has to be reflective of what is real time going on.
Now, Stephanie, I will say that we have not received a lot of answers on the program quite like that one when I've asked that question before, but I can tell you that as you brought that up, I can just hear like the sound of all of the education professional viewers and listeners just going, yeah. I think you have a lot of supporters with your sentiment there. That's great. Okay. Stephanie, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for checking out Charter School Superstars.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.